When the Ice Age advanced along the southern shore of Alaska, great glaciers gouged out an enormous bay, an arm of the sea called Prince William Sound. It's 160 kilometers long and 130 kilometers across, and it's one of the most beautiful places in the world. For years, very few people had heard of this place, but on Good Friday, March the 24th, 1989, Prince William Sound became headline news.
The Exxon Shipping Company are playing a deadly tug-of-war with an ever-spreading oil slick in Prince William Sound, and the company president, Frank Iarossi, admitted
Filmed prior to the world-renowned spill, this program illustrates how things were before the oil. Nearly a decade after the spill, the effects of the oil continue to be disputed. The ecosystem has been damaged in places, but not destroyed. Most of the native animals seen in this film can still be found, but in many cases their numbers are reduced. Thousands of sea otters died as a result of the oil spill, but it wasn't the first time that the marine mammals had been seriously threatened. At the end of the 18th century, a Russian fur trader arrived to exploit the riches of Alaska, or Russian America as it was then known. The sea otter was among these riches. Barely 50 years later, the sea otter was nearly extinct in Prince William Sound, hunted out by the Russians and by the local people who worked for them. When the otter population was so low that hunting was no longer worthwhile, the killing came to an end, and the otter very nearly recovered its former numbers. Most people were thrilled to see it recover, but there are those, fishermen mostly, who say that the process has gone too far and that the otter numbers ought to be controlled. Prince William Sound lies on the shores of the northeastern Pacific Ocean at the head of the Gulf of Alaska. Its palisade of islands shelters it from all but the very worst storms. Humpbacked whales have always used the Sound in the summer. It's a quiet backwater where food is plentiful and disturbance is at a minimum. Some of the whales which visit Prince William Sound travel over 4,000 kilometers to Hawaii for the winter. Hawaii is the humpback's great breeding ground, but here in the north, food is the attraction. The whales spend the summer moving about the waters of Alaska and feeding on small shrimp-like creatures called krill. Summer is when human visitors come to Prince William Sound, travelling by float plane, which is the only quick and reliable means of transport in this remote region. The float plane is the principal link between the remaining scattered settlements among the islands. Most of the islands are uninhabited, the haunt of porcupines, bears, bald eagles, and deer. As the glaciers withdrew at the end of the Ice Age 10,000 years ago, they left behind them ridges of hard rock aligned roughly north to south. The animals used these islands as stepping stones to spread right across the Sound. Most of the islands have populations of deer. Once they were an important natural resource, providing food, skins and sinews for indigenous Americans. But most of the local people have left their scattered camps around the islands to move into the towns and the 20th century. So the islands are uninhabited. But there was a time when Prince William Sound nearly became a second Klondike. The gold rush passed it by, but at the turn of the century, 300 kilometers inland, the Kennecott copper mine was discovered. At that time, it was the richest in the world. The new railway which was built to carry the copper out was one of the wonders of Alaska. This was called the $1 Million Bridge. Now, its only value is for scrap metal. It was last used in 1938 and finally wrecked on Good Friday 1964 when a violent earthquake wrought havoc in the Sound. The epicenter was here, beside the Columbia Glacier. The glacier flows 60 kilometers from the Chugach Mountains into the Sound. Its front is 6 kilometers across, and every day it drops thousands of tons of ice into Columbia Bay. The 20 glaciers which flow into the Sound are the chief architects of its dramatic scenery. Most of them have been retreating since 1983, probably due to climate changes. Each year, the Columbia Glacier alone releases huge amounts of ice, along with accumulated debris which it scoured from its 60-kilometer course. Close to the site of the village of Chuniga, which was swamped and abandoned in the earthquake, the Chuniga Glacier is less active where it tumbles into Icy Bay. Visiting kayakers can explore where indigenous hunters once pursued otters in their sealskin-covered canoes. The pattern of life has changed. From the point of view of the wildlife of the Sound, it's been a mixed blessing. On a quiet morning in May every year, the little harbour of Cordova hums with suppressed tension and powerful boat engines. The killer whales have been reaping the harvest already, but for humans this is the first day. The salmon season has begun. A flotilla of boats sets out, each skipper making for his own favourite location in the Sound. Fishing is the main business in Cordova. The opening of the salmon season is a hectic time for humans and wildlife alike. Some skippers believe that the killer whales will lead them to the salmon. Others have been known to shoot at them, accusing them of interfering with the fishery. The whales' echolocation and mobility enables them to feed at will, while humans, for all their modern technology, still need an element of luck to provide them with a catch. Five different species of salmon come each year to breed in the 900 spawning rivers which flow into the Sound. They're numbered in tens of millions. Alaska's salmon fishery has been erratic. Between the 1940s and the mid-70s, the catch fell by half, partly because of overfishing and partly because of a series of hard winters. Now, in Prince William Sound, fishermen and biologists have the added problem of oil spills to worry about. When this film was shot, an oil spill was one of those distant ecological threats. Nowadays, many scientists are looking at the effects of oil on the salmon. In the past, they concentrated more on natural causes of death, migration and their evolution. Atlantic and Pacific salmon can be traced back to a common ancestor. But millions of years ago, a few fish must have travelled through Arctic waters into the Pacific. When the land bridge formed, connecting Alaska to Siberia, they were cut off. By the time the bridge was broken again a million years ago, there were 6 different species of Pacific salmon. 5 of them breed in Alaska. All Pacific salmon die as soon as they've spawned. At the mouth of each of the salmon rivers, the dead and dying fish provide food for scavengers and predators alike. Because Prince William Sound is relatively compact, with so many rivers so close together, it's an ideal place to study what's happening to the salmon. Before the oil, the question was, why are there good years and bad years, and can the range be predicted? In streams like this, it's fairly easy to monitor the movements of a whole returning generation. The presence of dippers indicates that the water is clean and the stream is undisturbed. The presence of a bear is a sign that it knows what a salmon trap is. Bears and scientists show mutual respect, but the people carry rifles just in case. There's still a lot to learn about the factors affecting the size of the salmon run in any given year. To manage the fishery properly, the state has been measuring how many fish arrive each year and what condition they're in. The growth rings on a single scale reveal the fish's age and its state of health. Pink salmon, like this one, return after 1 year at sea. The biologists can predict how many should come back, but they're not always right, and they want to know why. There are several of these research stations around the Sound, all working on aspects of the same question. How can this salmon population be harvested without suffering lasting damage? The trap takes a random sample of all the fish coming up the river. To keep the sample natural, sport fishing is banned along the banks. The bears are harder to discourage. Fortunately, only a few learn how to get into the traps. There are bears on most of the larger islands in the Sound, and the mainland, especially here in the west, teems with them. Every summer they feast on the salmon run, laying down fat for their winter hibernation. A convenient trap is an added bonus. Predation by bears has a negligible effect on the salmon population. The bears are not a cause for concern. But the huge tankers carrying oil from the pipeline, which pass through the Sound in a steady procession, have proved a major threat. All the animals depend on clean water and are therefore at risk, from the bottom of the food chain to the top. In 1972, the Department of the Interior made an impact statement in which they stated that statistically an oil spill was inevitable. Unfortunately, they were proved right, and the consequences were all too predictable. But the oil isn't the only threat. There's another danger from heavy boat traffic. Even killer whales must sleep from time to time. About 500 kilometers south of the Sound, near the port of Juneau, this one was hit by a large ship, not a tanker, perhaps a ferry or a cruise liner. Scientists collect what information they can from the corpse, but there seems no way of preventing similar accidents in the future. Away from the shipping lanes, life is less risky. Stella's sea lions were named after George Wilhelm Stella, the Danish biologist on the St. Peter, the first ship to explore these waters in 1741. Their main breeding grounds are in the Aleutian Islands, 1,000 kilometers to the west. But they have breeding colonies all around the North Pacific, from Japan to California. Over a century ago, the great whaling skipper and explorer Charles Scammon predicted that commercial hunting would wipe out sea lions within a very few years. He was almost right. Fortunately, the sea lions survived in a few remote locations like this. As well as being a natural sanctuary from which the sea lions made their comeback, Prince William Sound is home to colonies of seabirds. Kittiwakes breed all round the Arctic, across the top of Siberia and Canada, and as far south as the British Isles. A kittiwake breeding colony is an extremely noisy place, as each pair proclaims ownership of its own particular ledge. Trumpeter swans were once common right across North America, but their migration route took them over too much farmland, and they were very nearly exterminated by shooting. Here in the Sound, 1,000 birds still gather every summer. In some other parts of the world, including Britain, oyster catchers are black and white. Here, they're all black. Many of the islands are capped with muskeg, a deep, spongy bog which delivers endless streams of water throughout the summer. Part of the kittiwake colony is underneath one of these perpetual waterfalls. The Cascades are a reminder that Prince William Sound is bounded to the east by the Alaskan rainforest. As soon as the young birds have fledged, the kittiwakes will leave for the open sea, where they spend the winter. When these scenes were recorded on film, Prince William Sound was a pristine wilderness waiting for disaster to strike. Statisticians spoke of the threat of a tanker coming to grief and estimated that an oil spill was likely to happen in the next 50 to 100 years. In the event, it was less than 2 years after this film was taken that the Exxon Valdez ran onto the Bligh Reef. Everyone knew that a disaster like this would happen one day, but when it did, the operation to clean up was delayed. After 2 days of inactivity, a violent storm blew up. The short-term damage this caused was highly visible, but the long-term effects continue to be disputed. Days after the oil spill, the sludge was thick on the beaches. It also covered the trees in some places where it had been flung by the storm. Gleaming bronze shapes among the rocks had been birds, guillemots, cormorants and eider ducks, and others which were unrecognizable, some poisoned by the oil, others swamped in it. Corpses were also found floating in relatively clean water with scarcely a feather out of place and no sign of oil. They'd been overcome by the fumes from light oils which had damaged their lungs. People were saying, wait till they start finding oiled otters, then the world will realize what's happened. Sea otters are one of the world's best-loved animals. They're so lively, inquisitive, agile. Quite unlike this tragic creature coughing and shivering on the beach. A couple of fishermen from Cordova had joined the effort to catch sick otters, to send them to Valdez for cleaning and rehabilitation. The effort up there was both colossal and chaotic. Very few of these animals survive for more than a few weeks at best. Maybe a couple of hundred out of nearly 10,000 victims in Alaskan waters. Directly after the spill, the salmon fishermen fared badly. The oil company paid them compensation. They couldn't give them back the fishery. The 1994 return of pink salmon to Prince William Sound resulted in a near-record harvest. In spite of this, counts of wild stocks, rather than hatchery-reared fish, were below average. Scientists feel it will take several more years of research before a proper assessment of salmon recovery rates can be made. The cameraman who recorded all of the pre-oil spill footage returned shortly after the disaster to film these later scenes. In taking these shots, both he and the boatman became ill with headaches and nausea from the fumes. They had to travel through 150 kilometers of blue petrol sheen and black sludge.
Scope things out, Tom.
I mean, that's the same one.
At first, the team netted the dead birds and otters to add to the inventory of death and destruction. Soon there were too many. They left them for others to collect while they catalogued the damage on film.
Yeah. 6'5".
The silent sound, as this place is sometimes called, took on a new silence. A large part of Prince William Sound had become a lifeless monument to the oil industry. The real fault lies with the world's complete dependence on oil. While that lasts, people will continue to be faced with the difficult choice between satisfying the demand and risking yet more damage to the fragile environment.
No dwellers of the deep tomorrow, but at 7:30 on Wednesday we visit Palau, an archipelago of 200 islands in the Pacific. Lovely.